Hi, it's Mrs. Sobek, here to review with you for your quiz on Chapter 8, Sections 1 and 2. All right, so this beginning part should be really easy because it's all definitions, but it's really important that you know what these words mean in order to understand the unit. So you should have all of these definitions memorized. Okay, so first one, number one, a republic. A republic is a form of government where the people have the power. Usually that means that they show that power by voting for representatives that then go to the government and make decisions for them. So I'm going to put that in. Usually choose representatives. Okay. The Articles of Confederation were the first plan for government for the United States, and they failed. They actually failed horribly. They didn't work very well at all because they were way too weak. But they did have major success, and that was figuring out what are we going to do with the land that had been gained by the Revolutionary War. And so they passed two laws. The first one is called the Land Ordinance of 1785, and that land ordinance divides the Northwest Territory into 6 square mile. They're called townships. And that meant that they could easily sell that land to the settlers who wanted to move west. So that was a success of the Articles of Confederation, was figuring this out, that they could take this land and get money by selling. But the biggest success was really the Northwest Ordinance, which created a plan for orderly growth of the U.S. by how do I put this? Like, they made a plan that how is that land going to be governed? Creating a plan for government. They're the ones that decide that when you get 5,000 men, you can have a local assembly. When you get 60,000 people, you can apply to become a state. And that's used not just during this time period, but as our country continues to grow. Okay, the straw that broke the camel's back and showed how weak the Articles of Confederation was really Shays' Rebellion, which was an uprising of debt-ridden, meaning they had lots of debt-ridden Massachusetts farmers that proved the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. It was very obvious after that they needed to do something else. And so they decided to go then to the Constitutional Convention. It was a meeting held in 1787 that originally, the first reason that they were there was supposed to amend or fix the Articles of Confederation. But ultimately, what they did instead created a new constitution. At the Constitutional Convention, one of the big issues was, how are we going to have representatives? How are we going to decide how many representatives each state has? Virginia had a plan, and their plan was to base the number of representatives on the population of the state. Virginia was a big state. They knew that if it was based on population, that they would get lots of representatives. New Jersey, on the other hand, was a small state. Their plan was to base the number of representatives on equality. They wanted to have one per state because they knew that as a small state that they would never be able to compete if the larger states had their representatives based on their population. And so this almost tears them apart. This almost ends the writing of the Constitution, but they come up with the Great Compromise. And in the Great Compromise, they decide that they're going to have 3 branches of government, that in the legislative branch, there will be 2 houses, and then they're going to use the Virginia plan for one house and the New Jersey plan for the other house. So the Senate will be based on equality, equal representation, or Google wants me to say. They actually decide on 2 per state, but it's still equal. And the House of Representatives will be based on the population of the state. So there are some states with a lot more representatives than there are some states that have like 1. Okay, the other issue is, what are they going to do with slavery? How are they going to treat slaves? The northern states want slaves to count as part of the property for taxation. The southern states want slaves to count as part of their population to get them more representatives. And they decide to use the number of slaves for both of those things, but to count only 3/5 of the slaves. So they decide that they will count 3/5 of enslaved people for both the purpose of taxation, I can't type today, taxation, and the purpose of representation in the government. And so the southern states gain some power, but they also gain some taxes from the 3/5 compromise. And obviously slaves are not being consulted at this point because they aren't represented in the Constitutional Convention and they don't get any rights from that compromise. Okay. All right, we got a couple of important people that you need to know. The first one is Daniel Boone. He is a frontiersman who created the Wilderness Road. And the Wilderness Road is really important because it opens up the West to settlement. And so people use that road to get past the Appalachian Mountains into Kentucky and ultimately into the rest of the West. James Madison is one of our founding fathers. We often call him by the nickname the Father of the Constitution. And he wrote much of the Constitution himself. He's a very strong Federalist, advocate of the Constitution and having a strong national government. Okay, George Washington is important, not because he's the general anymore, because the war is over. He actually serves as the president of the Constitutional Convention, meaning that he's kind of controlling the meeting, making sure that everybody gets a chance to say what they believe, that everybody is going to get a chance to vote, and then that everything is run fairly. And they choose him because he's the hero of the revolution, and everyone trusts him. Okay. All right. A few more questions to make sure that you understand the details. So what states are in the Northwest Territory? Well, one of them is our state, Michigan. We also have Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and part of Minnesota. So we would now think of these states as the Midwest, but at the time this was the farthest west that our country went, and so they were called the Northwest. Okay. All right, thinking about the Articles of Confederation, I'm really thinking about why they had problems. What powers did the national government have under the Articles of Confederation? They had 4 main powers. They could wage war, they could make peace, they could sign treaties. Those all come out of the fact that during the Articles of Confederation time, we're still fighting the American Revolution. And they could also issue money, but they didn't have any silver gold to make that money worth anything. Okay, what powers did the state governments have under the Articles of Confederation? Well, of course, the states kept the most important powers for themselves. They had the power to enforce laws, and they had the power to levy taxes. And so the national government had to come to the state governments if they wanted to be able to have any money for anything. So what were the strengths of the Articles of Confederation, or what did they do right? Well, they kind of governed the U.S. through the Revolutionary War. They passed the Northwest Ordinance, which is important, which set the pattern for orderly growth of the United States. Okay, but they really are not very successful. They have a lot of weaknesses. They lacked the power to enforce laws. They lacked the power to levy taxes. They lacked the power to regulate trade between the states. Okay, and it took 13 out of 13 states to agree to make any changes. So it would have been really difficult to change the Articles of Confederation. All right, number 19. What law established an orderly system for expansion into new territory, including settling land disputes, and is considered the biggest success of the Confederation Congress under the Articles of Confederation? Well, if you haven't gotten it yet, because I've said it now several times, this law is called the Northwest Ordinance. What two branches of government did not exist in the Articles of Confederation? Well, the Articles of Confederation really only create a legislature. So they don't have an executive branch and they don't have a judicial branch. Part of why they are so weak. Why was the Constitutional Convention created? Well, their original purpose was to fix or amend the Articles of Confederation. Okay, and then this last one, the term Founding Fathers. Founding Fathers means the men who created the United States. They are our founders, meaning they are the ones who started it. Some examples of Founding Fathers might include our guy, George Washington, hero of the Revolution. Might include Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Franklin, who was a statesman. Might include James Madison, who wrote our Constitution. Might include John Adams. And there are many others that could be on that list as well. Hope you do a great job on your test. Make sure that you're studying. See you later.